Este es un contenido de Uninorte Académico. Suscríbete, aprende y comparte.
Muy buenos días, sean cordialmente bienvenidos al último evento de la Escuela Lingüística 2023, que es el conversatorio titulado Potencialidades y desafíos de la formación en literacidades académicas en el contexto latinoamericano. En este panel vamos a tener a 3 académicos. Vamos a tener al profesor Christian Mathisen, al profesor Francisco Veloso y a Federico Navarro, nuestro invitado central de la escuela. Bien. Hi, Christian. Hi, Francisco.
Hello, everyone.
Bueno, Christian Mathisen es profesor visitante del Departamento de Estudios Ingleses de la Universidad Complutense de Madrid, profesor honorario de la Universidad Normal de Pekín y de la Universidad Nacional de Australia en Canberra, y profesor invitado de la Universidad de Ciencia y Tecnología de Pekín. Su actividad investigadora más reciente incluye trabajos sobre el discurso médico y la comunicación en materia de salud, el lenguaje en los planes de estudio y otros aspectos de la lingüística educativa, los estudios multilingües, las artes del lenguaje y el lenguaje del espacio. Tenemos también al profesor Francisco Veloso, quien tiene un doctorado en letras por la Universidad Federal de Santa Catarina y actualmente es profesor adjunto en la Universidad Federal de Acre, en Brasil. Sus intereses de investigación incluyen el discurso de los medios, el discurso político y los estudios de historietas, examinando la semiosis desde los supuestos teóricos de la lingüística sistémico-funcional y la semiótica social. Tenemos a nuestro invitado, el doctor Federico Navarro, quien es licenciado en Letras por la Universidad de Buenos Aires, con diplomado en Estudios Avanzados y doctor en Lingüística por la Universidad de Valladolid. Es decano de la Escuela de Educación de la Universidad Bernardo O'Higgins, ha sido investigador principal o coinvestigador en diversos proyectos de investigación financiados sobre escritura y enseñanza, y es presidente de la Asociación Latinoamericana de Estudios de la Escritura en Educación Superior y Contextos Profesionales, ALES. La metodología va a consistir en 3 rondas de preguntas, aproximadamente cada ronda va a llevar 15 minutos, aunque pudiéramos no cubrir todas las preguntas. Al final de cada ronda yo voy a estar haciendo una síntesis o un resumen. La lengua del panel va a ser inglés, bien, pero la lengua de los resúmenes va a ser el español. ¿De acuerdo? We're ready to begin. Welcome again, Christian and Francisco. So for the first question, we will be asking Federico, then Christian, then Francisco. Writing academically implies appropriating meaning-making practices associated with disciplinary communities. What, in your regard, is the role of agency and voice in this process? So, Federico. Sorry.
Bueno, ¿se escucha ahí? Ahí estamos bien. Can you hear me there? Yes? Christian? Francisco? Yes, great.
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, let me tell you that it's a real pleasure to be here or there or anywhere with Christian and Francisco. So thank you, Jesus, for making it possible. Also, I would like to say that I'm going to code switch a bit. Quiero decir que voy a hablar un poco en español y pasar de una lengua a la otra. Así fomentamos también un poquito el multilingüismo. Nosotros como académicos latinoamericanos sabemos un poco de inglés, un poco de portugués, un poco de español y nos movemos en esas tierras multilingües y es parte de nuestro rol periférico en la construcción de conocimiento, así que es importante que visibilicemos esa barrera extra que muchas veces tenemos. So, let me refer to this question. The question is very wide, so I'm going to focus on one aspect, something I mentioned before in our workshop this morning. Universities are are in a sort of tension, in a contradiction position, because on the one hand, they have this social contract with the community, with the students and families, in that they promise them to to teach certain competencies, skills, and those skills, competencies, and knowledge are supposed to be the same for everybody. Everybody graduating in a certain program, medicine, architecture, philosophy, whatever, they have to have basically the same skills, because otherwise that university cannot be certified and the social contract is not fulfilled. So from that point of view, we are expecting all graduate students to write similarly, right? That is the expectation. And for many of us, that is our role, right? To help that happen, to help that process happen. But on the other hand, and this is the tension I'm referring to, universities are supposed to advocate diversity, creativity, a critical perspective, and change, because our societies are not, equity is not that often in our societies, especially in Latin America. So we are expecting these professionals to change the world. And from that point of view, they have to do things in a different way, and in a way that in our programs we cannot anticipate, because that's the very purpose of changing things, right? So from that point of view, we shouldn't be expecting everybody to write in the same way. We shouldn't be expecting everybody to think in a similar way or have the same skills and agency. Because if we want everybody to write in the same way, we already have ChatGPT, right? ChatGPT can do it for us. So, on top of that, many students, especially non-traditional students that are the first in their family to attend higher education, who are, at the end of the day, the most traditional students, the most frequent students nowadays in universities, they have an active position towards those expected ways of communicating, because those expected ways of communicating are not natural to them or to their communities. And we have found evidence that sometimes these students are bullied in their communities by their loved ones, because they start talking in a different way, right? In a strange, threatening way. So they have to accommodate their previous identities to this new layer of identity that they are acquiring at university. So voice and agency in the case of students has to do with adopting this identity, adopting this new way of being and participating in the community, and at the same time accommodating, transforming the previous identities. And we as teachers, we have to go together with students along this path. We have to help them acquire and get familiar with these expectations, but at the same time, we have to critically recognize that they might not want them. They might have some, active resistance to that expectations. Y no lo escucho en español, perdón. La próxima pregunta la respondo en español.
Thank you very much, Federico. So for you, Christian, again, question, writing academically implies appropriating meaning-making practices associated with disciplinary communities. What, in your regard, is the role of agency and voice in this process?
Yes, thank you very much. I think there are different ways of coming at it. I take the starting point that Federico gave us, I think, is very important. And in some sense, this has been an ongoing process going back a few hundred years, of course, depending on the country, with the increase of mass education at different educational levels. And in some places, there was a kind of fairly explosive growth in the 1960s, coming after the Second World War period. So we go through these periods where there are particular pressures, I think. And some of the pressures will be unique to certain places. I've experienced them in certain places. But the general picture that Federico drew, I think, is one we find in many places around the world. In one sense, this is Pygmalion on the content plane of language in context. Now, I remember George Bernard Shaw's play Pygmalion that I think premiered around 1912 or 1913, and then was turned into a very successful musical, My Fair Lady. A number of issues were confronted by George Bernard Shaw. This had to do with, in sense coming from below, the expression plane. What if a Cockney-speaking choir girl in London starts speaking RP English or the Queen's English? Now, in the play, you find that actually there also goes some content with this, the meanings you make and so on, and then also the social etiquette and all that. It's just a simple way of thinking about this challenge that many have met and will continue to meet. I think we can think about the challenge as linguists, of course. One has to do precisely with the modes of meaning. I don't think that we shouldn't think of this as appropriating meaning, but just gaining access to or expanding one's personal meaning potential. And I think that's a lifelong enterprise. So we go through life expanding our personal meaning potential in interaction with others. One important aspect of that is, of course, expanding one's repertoire of registers, of functional varieties. And that certainly happens in tertiary education in different stages. And there's major challenge going from the school subjects of secondary education into the disciplines of tertiary education, something we can talk about. Now, one challenge is to do with certain features of the registers. And people talk about the STEM disciplines, so science, technology, economics, mathematics, right? For mathematics, we could actually say semiotics, because here mathematics is just one representation of the semiotic system. Now, the characteristics of this discourse are unfamiliar, as Federico said, to many who enter as first-generation students universities. And this actually is a problem that was already highlighted in the British context by Bernstein, starting in the 1950s. His much misunderstood distinction between restricted and elaborated code as a way of exploring educational failure or educational challenges. But we can now revisit this, of course, with a much richer understanding of language in context and also other semiotic systems. But there will be variation across disciplines, I think. And if we think about features that are very characteristic of academic Spanish, academic English, for example, ideational grammatical metaphor. Now, it's quite varied across disciplines, the motivation, as shown by Michael Halliday in a study of 500 years of evolution of academic English. It was highly motivated in, say, the material sciences. It becomes, I think, more problematic when you leave the material sciences and go to immaterial ones, by which I mean social studies, for example, history, literary criticism, and also strands of linguistics. Here, I think it can become an even greater challenge because the metaphorical mode of discourse becomes very abstract and it's not necessarily grounded in scientific technicalization. And people have studied these different discourses. And I'm struck with this when I look at the first questions you ask us, both in Spanish and English. It seems to me, in some sense, it's symptomatic precisely of the challenges in this kind of disciplinary discourse. How do we relate the way that academically this is construed, the world in which these things happen, learning and teaching, reading and writing and so on, in a fairly metaphorical, abstract way, where we talk about agencies and voices, we talk about challenges and so on, we're losing the participants, right? How do we relate this to programs of action that will be relevant in the classrooms of the different disciplines, for example? So I think that's a significant challenge. Another challenge in many places, of course, has to do with the pressures on students to develop their multilingual meaning potentials. So if there are students coming from a community language other than the language of higher education, this will be a challenge to them. They have to master the meaning potential of, as it is involving metaphor, abstraction, and so on, in a language they didn't grow up with. And here a lot, I think, will depend on what happened in primary and secondary school. So I think that is a very important part of the picture. Now, I don't want to take up more time, so these are just some pointers. I discussed this with friends from Africa, and they said, yes, these issues are very similar to the ones we face. But of course, there will be different mixtures. And again, I just come back to this notion of a meaning potential being a constant, lifelong expansion. So our personal meaning potential, an important aspect of the way that the meaning potential expands is through our ability to take on new registers, new functional varieties, new ways of meaning, and also growing them potentially in different languages. Again, this will be variable, but I think these are all things we could come back to consider as part of the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Francisco, what do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. It's nice to be back in Colombia, in Barranquilla, at least virtually. It's very nice. Unfortunately, we are not there to enjoy the good food and the weather. Okay, so about this, the role of agency and voice, I would think about agency and voice in terms of education at large, and education within the context of something that Colombia and Brazil, Argentina, we are very familiar with, which is this neoliberal mindset or ideology that is working in our societies, and of course, they affect education. So developing agency and voice is crucial to development, for instance, of society, and it's boosted by critical thinking. So I usually, when I teach students the reasons why they should not plagiarize, I try not to tell them to not plagiarize because it's a sin or academic moral sin, but because they actually need to map out in their own text what they're actually saying. So this is not about protecting other people's copyrighted ideas, but to separate their voices, their agency from other people, so we can actually know what they really produced. So it's not about protecting other people's ideas, but your own, and placing yourself in a wider debate where we can discuss society. And the challenge, one of the challenges with that is that within these neoliberal ideologies, we don't really value, even universities, they are not valuing too much the expression of critical thinking, sort of just pushing for a Manichaean mindset, which is accepted in society. In Brazil, like in some other countries, that we have this rise in the extreme right. They build these discourses around, in Portuguese, the Spanish speakers will be able to relate to the sentence, which is homens de bem. I don't know how Jesus will translate that, but it's more like men of good faith.
Gente de bien. It would be in Spanish, gente de bien.
Gente de bien, which means they are white, male, religious people. And in society, people get blind to these ideological games, which I think are necessary to develop from early childhood in school, and start talking about writing, which is not about just reproducing knowledge, but actually developing, creating knowledge and position ourselves. But the issue might be that positioning ourselves might not be welcome in many occasions, because you're actually we are training students to go and reproduce the status quo. From the moment we develop agency and voice, then we start losing that possibility of challenging the status quo. For one instance, Christian, since last year in the Escuela, Christian called our attention to the use of these grammatical metaphors and like sustainability, and then we just erase the agents, the actors, who actually do what, how do we affect society, and what is it that we have to sustain, what is it that we have to act upon. But instead we have developed this discourse of sustainability, which is a high level abstraction where we don't really know what we are supposed to do and on what to act. Perhaps one of the reasons also is that societies tend to conform with groups, to be accepted. And new technologies, not only ChatGPT, but the previous social media, for instance, they have been catering for this uniformity, obedience and seduction of mind, I would say, sort of valuing desire more than critical independent thinking, which is related to agency. So we have the rise of influencers as a type of specialist. So they tell us what to do, how to sleep, how to exercise, how to eat, how to be happy. And so people are not really thinking in terms of how they can actually act on things, but they are just passively waiting to be told. So I think in our education system, we should be addressing more of these issues so we can actually value what students think and promote this ability. I think we would be perhaps in a safer place, especially in the development of extreme ideas that tend to exclude minorities, for example. So agency and voice are things that are key to the development of society, and we should be catering for this difference, for these different possibilities, and even in styles of writing, as Federico pointed out. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Francisco. I will now try to summarize in both Spanish and English, and then we will have an opportunity to maybe reply, pick up on an earlier point, and so on. Bueno, parece que tenemos posición de complementariedad entre nuestros panelistas. Parece que están de acuerdo en que se necesita, por un lado, que los aprendices expandan sus potenciales de significación para poderse apropiar de esas prácticas, pero que también, como señalaba Federico, es importante darles oportunidades para que ellos puedan expresar su desacuerdo frente a esta forma de significar que pueden resultar excluyentes, que pueden resultarles posiblemente ajenas a su forma de ver el mundo, y que, como enfatizaba Cristian y Francisco, tiene mucho que ver también con el uso de ciertos recursos en los registros que han evolucionado de manera orgánica o de manera, se podría decir también manipulativa, para cerrar los significados que pueden circular dentro de determinadas comunidades. So, well, the conclusion I gather from this round of questions is that you have we can say complementary perspective, but you on the whole agree on the point that students certainly need to be able to come to terms with these new ways of making meaning in disciplinary communities, but also that they need to be able to critically express their disagreement with or possible aversion towards ways of meaning which, as of Christian or Francisco were pointing out, may have developed organically or manipulatively to close off certain communities. And that a lot of it lies on the use of certain registerial features, such as grammatical metaphor, that can have also a manipulative uh, a manipulative purpose to simply uh, close people off from certain debates or certain realities. Is there anything you would like to reply or to other participants? So Federico would like to reply.
Bueno, ¿se escucha ahí? ¿Sí? ¿Estamos? Qué aburrido que todos los expositores piensen igual. Qué aburrido. Entonces voy a generar un poquito de debate, a ver si nos ponemos más picantes. Yo no estoy de acuerdo no estoy completamente de acuerdo con la idea de que uno va acumulando repertorios de recursos, ¿sí? A medida que va atravesando el sistema escolar, la educación superior y luego la participación profesional. Me parece un concepto interesante la idea de diversidad de géneros, diversidad de registros, diversidad de contextos, pero considero que es una visión que no toma en cuenta algunos elementos muy importantes como las teorías sobre la identidad, las teorías sobre la voz estudiantil y las teorías sobre agencia estudiantil. En realidad lo que sucede es que cuando uno expande sus posibilidades de construir significados, también transforma esos registros y formas de participación que poseía antes. No quedan intactos, no quedan intactos. Entonces, un estudiante que viene de una comunidad rural en donde en su barrio casi no hay graduados universitarios, ¿sí? Se desplaza todos los días en bus varias horas, va a la universidad y se titula a pesar de todas esas barreras, ¿sí? Ya no es la misma persona. No significa que su nueva identidad reemplaza a la anterior, pero sí la transforma. Y a esas identidades anteriores. Y esas nuevas identidades que ahora encarna esta persona y que también van de la mano de sus nuevas maneras de significar, son reconocidas por esa comunidad rural de la que viene. Y son reconocidas como una cosa extraña. Muchas veces con muchísimo rechazo. Las investigaciones sobre el tema muestran que al contrario de lo que uno puede imaginar, que muchas veces las familias apoyan a ese estudiante que asciende socialmente, que tiene esta oportunidad, muchas veces la reacción de las comunidades y las familias son reacciones defensivas. Ya no hablas como antes, ya no te vistes como antes, tienes ideas extrañas, ya no pasas tanto tiempo con nosotros. No trabajas ni aportas a la casa, te la pasas estudiando. Entonces, estos elementos que cruzan lo semiótico con lo social están operando y es importante que nosotros tengamos esta perspectiva, que sepamos esto y además que sepamos que hay estudios y evidencias al respecto, porque si no, nos parece que nuestros estudiantes simplemente van a ampliar lo que tienen y además lo van a abrazar con mucha alegría porque les estamos dando algo valiosísimo. Y en realidad hay resistencias identitarias, hay amenazas, hay celos, hay reacciones en las propias comunidades y hay transformaciones profundas. Entonces yo creo que esos recursos para significar que operaban en las identidades previas se transforman a partir de esta experiencia en educación superior. Y eso le añade una capa de complejidad, ¿sí?, a una perspectiva simplemente de expansión de géneros discursivos.
Okay, so Federico has pointed out that he's a bit in disagreement with the idea of expanding registerial repertoires for making meaning, because he believes that it's not simply a matter of expansion, but also that having appropriated these resources transforms who you are. And then when you go back to the communities where you came from, especially if you were an outsider to these more, we can say, socially valued registers, the community can react against you by judging you because you talk differently, because you dress differently, because your attitudes are differently. So it's not a matter of expansion, but also of transformation, and that this is not something that happens unproblematically, but it's something that can create conflict in the person's identity. I don't know, Christian, since you were the one who exposed the idea of expanding registrar repertoires, if you would have something to add in that regard, or to react to what Christian said.
Yes, my shorthand for that was Pygmalion and Eliza Doolittle, and the challenges she faced relative to the neighborhood, the family, friends, social class she came from, right? I don't think transformation and expansion are mutually exclusive, right? Not at all. I think if we want to effect change, and this goes back to a discussion we had about a year ago, history suggests that it has to be trinocular in Michael Halliday's sense of trinocular vision or trinocular perspective. So, which is why it's very hard, and because social systems and semiotic systems are incredibly complex, and they evolve systems, and it's difficult for us to know how to intervene successfully. I mean, the history is littered with unsuccessful attempts to intervene. But one aspect of it, I think, is to get the complementarity of the trinocular vision. So we have to, from below, from above, but also from round about. And I think there are many examples of history that suggest that from below, we're thinking about the communities, the families, students, local teachers, and so on, that this is absolutely essential in effecting change. And sometimes, often, this will be in conflict with a view from above, the people with power in different kinds of power, political power, administrative power, and maybe power due to knowledge, to authority, and so on. But then also from roundabout, we have to think about the system, and these, in some sense, have to come together to create the conditions for successful change. But if you look at a people's history of the world, then really significant changes have tended to be initiated from below. Now, whether they will be suppressed or not is another question. But one challenge is obviously for the students who take on different registers. This is what I meant by expansion. That means that they're able to take part in new institutional settings, new context. So that expands, in some sense, their power to mean. As Federico pointed out, that also creates a potential conflict. But as I said, that was what I meant by my shorthand reference to Eliza Doolittle in Pygmalion, but at the content plane, right, which may be more implicit, but and so harder to deal with. Now, in just a final comment, which I just want to, I mean, maybe I need to make it more pointed, right? So these discourses, these academic discourses of different disciplines in the communities, if they deal with material sciences, in some sense, they can be grounded, and we see the motivations for the development of the metaphorical systems. I just want to problematize it when we move up to immaterial systems, so social semiotic systems, in one way of thinking about it. Now, all these academic discourses are, of course, discourses for experts, by experts. And in some sense, you go through a period of hazing, you're admitted into the club when you go through the undergraduate program, and further maybe into master's, PhD studies. Now, that means that you create a community of people who have no problems with this metaphor, with this kind of metaphorically, abstractly elaborated discourse. So let me be a little bit more pointed here. I'm just a bit concerned that this kind of discussion could lead to precisely the effect we want to avoid. That if we create a kind of virtual world in which we discuss these with the participants or the actors left out. So I'd like to come back and just, as a challenge to us all, Now, we talk metaphorically, abstractly about agency, about voice. Now, these are all accepted in academic discourse, but I think it's worthwhile coming back to problematize them and see what does it mean actually when we think about the learner path of somebody coming from a small rural community, first person to maybe even graduate from secondary school, but certainly go into tertiary school. What does it mean more congruently? So that's, I'd like to leave that as a little challenge. Thank you.
Bien, la intervención de Christian enfatiza el hecho de que la transformación y la expansión no son mutuamente excluyentes, que muchas veces el discurso de las comunidades marginales o, digamos, excluidas históricamente termina volviéndose la base para discursos más elaborados, y cierra llamando a problematizar nociones como las de voz y la de agencia, porque de cierta manera configuran un discurso virtual donde los participantes, los agentes realmente están ocultos allí. I don't know if you, Francisco, would like to chip in with any thoughts in this debate.
No, I think some of the things I will say will be complementary to the other questions related to this.
Okay. So maybe we move on to the other questions and then, yeah. So the second question, artificial intelligences such as ChatGPT have become a hotly debated issue in higher education nowadays. What, in your view, is an ethical and sensitive position regarding their role in the development of academic literacies? So we begin with Christian, then Federico, then Francisco.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it's certainly hotly debated. I'm a little bit tempted to say much ado about nothing. Now, again, if we take a longer term perspective, one is the 4 decades plus where I've been involved in AI in one way or another, maybe as a linguist working with computational people, computational linguists, AI people, software engineers, and so on, trying to model some aspect of language. Takes us back to the late 70s or so. An even longer perspective is the whole question of what we might call semiotic tools in the context of, if you put it, academic literacies. So we can go back to the printing press or before and just learn lessons from the effect that these innovations had, these new technologies, which I summarize as semiotic technologies. So the spread of reading after the printing press, lowering the price of printed documents, the rapid expansion of personal libraries, but also the whole change in the nature of reading, from essentially reading aloud, intensive reading, to the gradual development of extensive reading, where you sort of separate reading, as in reading aloud, from, in some sense, fact extraction. And it just so happens we in a very dramatic period, of course, and one of the challenges is the tremendous acceleration in the technology. I think it's often the case that technology, as it were, is ahead of legislation and also possibly ethics. Well, the two go together, of course, right? So we face the challenge of having a technology, and this goes back not just to the current breakthroughs in the public eye of AI, but also before. So we don't quite know how to deal with this. And it also involves, personal behavior. How do people behave when what used to be private, face-to-face conversation, casual conversation, now suddenly is also public, and it's difficult to come to grips with this. Now, the breakthrough, apparent breakthrough in AI that we've seen and sort of symbolized by ChatGPT, it's been going for a long time. And I've been, listened to many conversations of this kind. So I think it's a little bit important to, one, stand back and see it in a temporal perspective. And one response I would have is, it's the same as before. We have to construct we have to theorize, but also model as an application the complementarity of, as it were, humans making meaning and the tools at our disposal. We've had very much a similar kind of development in machine translation, starting in the 50s, then named as machine translation in the 60s. A lot of debate saying, oh no, it wasn't possible. We would never have machine translation. Well, that turned out to be a lot of time spent arguing something that wasn't very worthwhile, typically in the philosopher's armchair. Now, I think part of the challenge today is with things like ChatGPT it's now in the public eye and public media, and even tech writers, I think, who write about this, they do not have the background to understand exactly actually what these systems are able to and not able to do. I mean, they know that they have large language models that is part of big data, but I don't think that there's a deep understanding of the limit in terms of local dependencies in these machine or deep learning systems, as opposed to longer distance dependencies. And also the fact that everything is from below, again, in Michael Haller's trinocular vision. So everything that these systems do is essentially from below. So they miss the view from above and the view from roundabout. And I don't think there is a general awareness of this constraint. And you have to probe, you have to push these systems to begin to discover where they are weak. And that's precisely from roundabout and from above. Now, the interesting question is, can we in any way complement this? Can we look ahead? And it seems to me, not surprisingly perhaps, that systemic functional linguistics is uniquely placed to allow us to reason about this. And one component would certainly be to return to the baby that was thrown out with the qualitative bathwater when statistical techniques took over. The question of modeling meaning from above, meaning and context, or if you prefer to think of it as knowledge and cognition. That is sort of what's been left out with this early success, apparent success. But again, I'd like to emphasize this is a gradual development, and it's part of the noise now, in a sense, is just that there's general public awareness. Now, in terms of the ethical positions and so on, I think, again, it's helpful to go back and think, how do we meet this ethically, but also pedagogically with comparable semiotic technologies? I remember the debate around, mini calculators when they could come into the classroom, or the debate around the slide ruler. Would we be allowed to use a slide ruler? This goes back to the 19th century or so, right, when I was at school and did mathematics in high school. Would we be allowed to use the slide ruler in tests, for example? So I think there is a long tradition of reasoning about this, and we can probably benefit from drawing on this. And also, very importantly, think across different educational systems, different value systems on how they take it. So we look for best practice when we reason about it. But again, be aware of the fact that technology tends to run ahead of a consensus about ethics and legislation, and in some sense that codifies this consensus about ethics. But I just like to have a positive spin on it in a sort of sense. This is just another phase, in some sense, in our ongoing figuring out how to have a complementary rather than adversarial relationship to semiotic technology.
Thank you, Christian. So let me summarize in Spanish. Bueno, básicamente la posición de Christian es que en lo que se refiere a ChatGPT, pues esto no es más que la continuación de algo que se viene haciendo a lo largo de la historia, que es que llegan nuevas herramientas. Estas herramientas al principio hay resistencia hacia ellas, pero luego hay una acomodación. Pasó así, según él, con la imprenta, en el pasado con... incluso en el contexto escolar, cuando se empezaba a traer, por ejemplo, calculadoras o proyectores de diapositivas, ese tipo de tecnologías, pues al principio había cierta resistencia. Entonces, su punto es que el desarrollo tecnológico muchas veces se adelanta a lo que sucede en la legislación y en las consideraciones éticas. También llama la atención sobre la limitación de estas tecnologías que básicamente es una construcción o operan bajo principios estadísticos desde abajo, y que esto les hace carecer de la posibilidad de pensar en contexto desde arriba, y que, bueno, eso también debe ser considerado. Federico, what are your thoughts?
Yes, when thinking about this question, I agree with Christian that this is just another step in gradual development that goes together with the history of writing in general. We have to remember that writing is a technology. Writing is a tool. Is not a biological aspect of human beings, but a technology. And if we look at other tools, recent tools, we've been using, the word processor for some time now. More recently, some of us have been using programs such as Grammarly, for example, which is quite similar to ChatGPT in some aspects, because it's the first program I have come across that gives concrete suggestions that go, beyond the clause, and that was also a milestone. And now ChatGPT, also online dictionaries, translators that have become much more powerful, like sometime 3 or 4 years ago. ChatGPT is one tool among other semiotic tools, and I think we have to start there. I agree with Christian. And also, in the case of ChatGPT, together with the other tools, still human beings have to make decisions. We cannot just use a text produced by ChatGPT and submit it, and hand it in, because it doesn't quite work yet. It doesn't quite work yet. So from that point of view, these tools cannot operate on their own, perhaps for very simple tasks, but not for, writing assignments in higher education or in the scientific system. So that's something important. So my second point is that writers still have a key role when dealing with these tools. And we still have a key role, because ChatGPT cannot do certain things yet. For example, ChatGPT does not know how to put up with sources to produce academic texts. It tends to invent sources in a very funny way. Also, it tends to invent quotes from authors. That's very funny. Just then ask ChatGPT to quote Christian Mathisen or me or Jesus, and you will read very funny stuff. Also, ChatGPT tends to be extremely standardized in its style. And that's, on the one hand, it's boring, and on the other hand, it doesn't, it doesn't resemble any student's voice. So it doesn't have a voice. We've been talking about voice before. Also, ChatGPT is not very successful yet in accounting for local issues, especially, issues from non-mainstream issues. So we are here in Latin America, living in places that are not mainstream. We are not mainstream. Sorry to tell you, we are not. So when you ask ChatGPT to give an opinion about a certain topic, it tends to adopt a position from the global north, from more mainstream places of enunciation. And it also, from that point of view, it also produces kind of funny texts for our local contexts. So these are three things ChatGPT doesn't do very well now. So that's why we have to work with other students, explain this, and ask them to use ChatGPT in a good way. Not just using those texts that won't make any sense to us, because they will use ChatGPT anyway. They are doing it now, at least in Chile. I know here too, so they are using it because it seems to work well, but it doesn't work that well. Also, ChatGPT. Let me mention a couple of more optimistic aspects of the eruption of ChatGPT. On the one hand, it is forcing teachers to produce more creative writing assignments. We cannot just use the same assignments that are more reproductive of knowledge or that are more repeated over time. We need to make some space for students' perspectives, for students' choices, for students' research on their local contexts. Because otherwise, if we're expecting a generalized, standardized answer, well, that's exactly what ChatGPT will provide. But if we ask for more local, situated answers, ChatGPT doesn't work that well. So we need to change our writing assignments. Another positive aspect of ChatGPT is that it is creating discussions about students' voice, about plagiarism, about authorship. And this is for teachers of writing is a great opportunity, because all of a sudden authorities at universities are creating commissions to discuss these topics, right? While these topics are not have not been so hot lately, right? But now in many institutions, this is a topic. Writing is something that is interesting to university presidents. So we need to take advantage of that chance. And it's not solely a conversation with authorities. It's also a conversation in the classroom. So we have also not only writing teachers, but teachers across the curriculum. We have now the chance and the interest to talk about voice, to talk about writing, to talk about writing processes in the classroom. So ChatGPT also opens up that possibility. I think that we also have to reconsider using other tools that look a bit old-fashioned, like just writing in the classroom with a piece of paper and a pen. Right? We need to explore those tools that are tools at the end of the day, not very technological, not very but electronic, but tools at the end of the day. We need to go back there and start writing more in the classroom, together with our usual assignments at home. Also, we need to integrate other ways of communicating. For example, oral explanations of a piece of writing that I have handed in. So it's also an interesting opportunity to diversify our classroom a bit more, right? So that we make sure that that piece of text belongs to that student, right? And that student's voice. Thank you.
Bueno, Federico coincide en que ChatGPT es parte del desarrollo de la escritura, que en sí es una tecnología, y que aún debemos o hay mucho espacio para nosotros tomar decisiones debido a limitaciones en la tecnología misma, como su debilidad para lidiar con las fuentes, el hecho de que inventa lo que otros dicen, el hecho de que es demasiado estandarizado en su forma de escribir, que privilegia posturas y formas de escribir propias del norte global. Pero que también ha creado ciertos efectos positivos, como el hecho de que ahora los docentes están siendo más creativos en la forma como mandan sus asignaciones, sus trabajos, y que está creando discusiones acerca del rol de la voz de los estudiantes. Francisco, what do you think?
Okay, I was muted. Thank you. Thank you for sharing ideas, Christian, Federico. I think in terms of literacy, I think artificial intelligence per se is a challenge in terms of literacy. We need to help people understand that actually artificial intelligence has been around for a long time, as Christian pointed out, and it's not limited to ChatGPT. ChatGPT has its flaws, doesn't work perfectly, but it's moving fast, and we have artificial intelligence working seamlessly in other fields already, in things that we don't even actually think about. So if you just consider, for example, how calling an airline, I remember a few years ago, 2007, calling airlines and talking to a computer was very difficult. It was very formulaic. There was no interpersonal level whatsoever, yes, no, number. And now it almost feels like that actually it's a person who likes me, because they are very gentle. So it's very interpersonal. So that interpersonal ability, and in the past few years, artificial intelligence in language has been working a lot on, for example, emotions. So it's underway. So it gives people, it does this anthropomorphism. There is this anthropomorphism because then people start talking about ChatGPT almost like a person who can actually create things creatively in unexpected ways, when actually ChatGPT, for example, is far from that. I think I would define ChatGPT today as an encyclopedia on steroids, because it gives definitions. It might be useful for a couple of things. It can relate some different aspects of a topic, sometimes in a useful way, but it doesn't really outsmart us. And this anthropomorphism, this way of thinking that can actually do things we can. I've seen people writing and posting things saying that they fooled ChatGPT or they outsmarted ChatGPT, playing tricks like if you're dealing with a person, when we know it's far from that. So I think the first step is to develop literacy in the use of AI. I think this is the big challenge, including explaining and popularizing this idea of language model, so people understand how it works and that this is a machine. So there are the ethical issues, of course, as Federico pointed out, like plagiarism. But then we need to understand that it's not an infinite source of wisdom. So I think we need to bring this to the classroom, as Federico pointed out, but trying to teach students to definitely know how to make questions. My experience in the classroom has been much more about telling students that ChatGPT is useful, but only if you know how to make the questions. So that, in that sense, it is a good opportunity for us to work with writing in the classroom, because we know from experience that writing questions can be extremely difficult in terms of what you get in response. And in terms of a machine, there's no possibility for interpretation and trying to understand what you say. It would just take you for granted in the words you said and elaborate something, and that's something interesting. ChatGPT, for example, it's programmed to reply, and that's why we get so much nonsense, because it will reply no matter what. But then as we narrow down, and then we start finding the issues. So I think artificial intelligence per se is the challenge right now in terms of literacy. We have to explain and teach what it is and how it works, what is this language models, so that people can establish a more functional relationship and can explore the potential, and at the same time avoid the sort of the perils of it. Okay.
Thank you, Francisco. Well, it seems today we have had a poor choice of questions because all of our panelists have agreed completely. But I'm hoping that the next question is going to raise a hot debate. So let me just summarize in
Okay,
Spanish
just,
and English. Yeah.
Just if you want disagreement, because we know each other so well, I can disagree with
That's what
Francisco.
sells, you know.
Oh yes, please go ahead.
It's not an encyclopedia on steroids at all. And I come back to my gross characterization of this whole body of technology. It's doing it from below large volumes of text. So if it seems to be global north, it's simply because of the text that's gone in. And I would be willing to bet that if you asked it about topics in Sweden, it would be as wrong as if you asked them about topics in Ghana, for example. Not because Sweden isn't part of the global north, according to one definition, but because of the text that go in, these very, very large volumes of text. But again, the way to think about it is it's from below, it's missing the view from above and from round about. So there is no actual modeling of meaning in context, or if you prefer, of knowledge. It's only from below amassing statistical patterns according to very clever techniques, machine learning, deep learning, but that's it. So you can't expect it to have any encyclopedic knowledge whatsoever beyond what can be amassed. And I think that's very important. And when you talk about bringing it into the classroom, teaching students about what they can expect, I think this is a very critical aspect of it. Just as you did when the computer came in as a possible writing tool, and maybe now lovely handwriting will find a role in the classroom again. Okay, thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, that was very controversial, and I think Federico is going to add to the controversy.
No. I'm not.
You.
I agree with Christian. I mean, I would like to add something else about ChatGPT, because we didn't mention what it does very, very well. And there are a couple of things that it does tremendously well. And it's the very reason why our students are using it a lot. One thing is that it's very clever in structuring texts in a very general way. For example, from including introductions in any text that you ask it to write, moving from general to particular, and then from particular to general, right? This is not very specific of any genre, but a kind of general expectation in academic texts. Also, it's quite good in including lexis, a variety of words that are relevant to the topic under discussion. It's also quite good at discussing very specific contents. So at university, you ask your students to discuss theories or perspectives on a certain academic topic, and it's really, really good at that. And it's also very good at spelling and mechanics. So you don't expect any spelling mistake or mechanics problem in the texts. And it's a bit sad because this is something, these four aspects are something we are expecting from our students, But when you read a text produced by ChatGPT, the first thing you think is, this is not possible. My students cannot write that well. And that's kind of sad. So it's incredible. But now I'm expecting my student. I'm expecting, and I become happy when I see a spelling mistake. I'm happy when there's no introduction to the text. So perhaps also we can use ChatGPT as an opportunity to model that text in general have to have certain structure, have to have a variety of lexis, and that lexis has to be connected to the topic under discussion, etc. So also ChatGPT is an interesting tool in these other aspects, and we could take advantage of that.
Bueno, las posiciones han estado pues con un alto grado de acuerdo. Los tres coinciden en que ChatGPT es una herramienta que se suma a una larga trayectoria de herramientas conectadas con la escritura, que tienen limitaciones y potencialidades. Desde el punto de vista de Francisco, lo más importante es desarrollar una nueva literacidad o una serie de herramientas de literacidad para que los estudiantes aprendan a preguntarle a ChatGPT. Aunque, bueno, por otro lado, Cristian está en desacuerdo con el hecho de que ChatGPT sea una herramienta, una enciclopedia con esteroides. Para Cristian es simplemente una manera muy inteligente de amasar un gran volumen de textos, pero que carece de capacidad de razonamiento. Y bueno, por su parte también Federico nos llama a reconocer que hay algunas cosas que hace muy bien, como su capacidad para estructurar textos, su capacidad para discutir contenidos específicos, para la ortografía y para la mecánica. Entonces, bueno, creo que I think we can close with those thoughts, unless any of you has any additional. Okay, we can move on to the last round of questions, and then we can have interaction with the public as well. So the last question, and this question is motivated, among other things, by changes in the political landscape in Latin America in recent years. For example, what's been happening in Chile, Colombia, Brazil, what some describe as a shift to the left in South America, and also political changes in other parts of the world, like the ones Christian has been witnessing in Europe and also in Asia. So the question is, how political is academic writing and its teaching in academic literacies? Based on your experience, in your case, well, we will begin with Francisco. Based on your experience in Brazil, how political? ¿Qué tan política, qué tan político es la escritura académica y su enseñanza dentro de la alfabetización académica? Okay.
Well,
So,
education is very political, right, as a whole. And in Brazil, with Paulo Freire, with his ideas becoming more popular and really having a huge impact in Brazilian education, academic writing and academic literacy is very politicized. So much so that during all this Bolsonaro years, Paulo Freire embodies, he has become an enemy, something to get rid of from the educational system. One of the side effects is, for example, the growth and the push under Bolsonaro to bring back military schools, which he did. So these military schools, they will be working with the national curriculum, but adopting this idea of discipline, of military discipline, as something positive that will lead to better education, stating that the problem we have in education is actually more about discipline than curriculum or all the other issues that evolve, that are part of our problems in education and teaching of writing. So sorry. What we have, but at the same time in Brazil, since the 90s, we have developed the national curriculum. We have brought in genre-based pedagogy into the curriculum. Since the mid-90s, it became very strong, and nowadays it's extremely strong. But we can see there is kind of a mismatch between what we push through the curriculum and what we actually is done because there are all the pressures. For example, when students go to university and they need to take national exams, and they have to do the writing part. So we know already what to expect in terms of their writing, which is this very formulaic structure, which is 4 or 5 paragraphs, and we already know it's a formula. Paragraph 1, 2, 3. If you're very risky, if you dare to go to a 5th paragraph, it's because you're really bold, because people play safe, because then academic writing has become just a tool to get something else, a means to something else. And then we go back to our first question today, which is related to agency and voice, which is, this is not really being promoted in the classroom, because the real pressures in everyday life is that people make it to the next level, which is enter university, for instance, because then there are all the other pressures that arise from our terrible income distribution. So education is still a way of moving up the social ladder. So in that sense, writing is extremely political, and we have lots of challenges in that sense, which is when the students join university, then we need to start from there being very explicit about training them in terms of agentivity, voice, and authorship. I just submitted an assignment, and what Federico was saying, Chris, about bringing back paper and pen. I was very tempted to tell the students, you have to do this and with handwriting. But then I told them it has to be an original piece. And then I was wondering, how do I explain to them what an original piece means, which is it has to have marks of authorship, which would be misspelling, as Federico pointed out, and grammar issues, some problems in the text organization in general. But and then with ChatGPT, we have this even more problematic, because the next step now is what I get from students will be something perfectly done by ChatGPT, or maybe even corrected by, because there are also, other than ChatGPT, there are other AI tools that they don't create texts, but they revise and they improve the structure. So we have lots to discuss in that sense. So what about the tools that do not create, but they actually improve the writing? So how willing are we to accept that in the classroom, and how would that be used to improve writing? Because actually improving writing is also about improving mental capacities, critical thinking, the way you interpret things. So here we have this clash in terms of education and writing as something that challenges the status quo. So we have at university pretty good. I could say that we have very good, a very good, strong curriculum, genre-based. But we still need, the challenge is to how we actually make this work in the classroom, especially when we go to the rural areas, for example. Okay.
Thank you very much, Francisco. Bueno, según Francisco, la escritura es altamente política, y eso se refleja en la tensión entre las formas como se ve la escritura en el aula, qué debe significar, el hecho de que, por ejemplo, ciertas figuras como Paulo Freire durante el gobierno de Bolsonaro se hayan vuelto enemigos públicos, y que se haya optado por promover una educación basada en la disciplina militar. También el hecho de que haya tensión entre lo que se propone desde pedagogías o currículos emancipadores basados en modelos como la pedagogía de géneros textuales, pero que esto no necesariamente es lo que se refleja en lo que hacen los profesores, específicamente en contextos como los rurales, donde hay menor posibilidad de tener una influencia allí. Y por último, hacía énfasis en el rol de las tecnologías, las inteligencias artificiales para normalizar o homogeneizar identidades, y que eso también hace parte de ese carácter político de lo que es la escritura. So now we move on to Federico. What are your thoughts, Federico?
Bueno, si me permiten, voy a contestar en español. Perdón que te haga trabajar doble, Jesús. Coincido con Francisco que la escritura es política, y es política porque el lenguaje y la educación son políticas, ¿sí? Y lo voy a abordar desde dos puntos de vista. Por un lado, por un punto de vista más global de la vinculación de los gobiernos como el de Bolsonaro con el sistema educativo, y por otro lado, dentro de nuestro campo científico. Respecto de la primera línea de pensamiento, es bien extraño cómo se vinculan los diferentes gobiernos, más de izquierda o más de derecha, con el currículum escolar y en particular con la escritura y su enseñanza. No me extraña que un gobierno como el de Bolsonaro haya generado una estigmatización y persecución de la teoría de Paulo Freire. Eso es esperable, pero luego hay otras relaciones que son un poco más extrañas. Entonces, por ejemplo, hay la evaluación de la escritura, que es un tema del que hablamos bastante en estos días, es un tema que a los gobiernos de derecha les interesa muchísimo y a los gobiernos de izquierda les interesa poquísimo. Y eso en realidad es muy extraño, porque la evaluación de la escritura se puede hacer bien, se puede hacer mal, se puede hacer censal, se puede hacer muestral, se puede hacer de muchas maneras, se puede hacer con una construcción participativa o se puede hacer contratando servicios externos. Entonces, no es que la evaluación de la escritura es buena o mala en sí misma. Sin embargo, los gobiernos de izquierda tienden a ignorarla y restarle recursos, los gobiernos de derecha a apoyarla. Una experiencia similar estamos teniendo hoy en Chile con respecto al interés por la escritura en educación superior, porque el gobierno actual, que es un gobierno, en mi opinión, muy interesante en diversidad de aspectos, tiene una agenda que coloca el foco en lectura y escritura, pero en el sistema escolar. Y la educación superior ha quedado un poco fuera. Yo sospecho que esto se asocia a que la educación escolar es un derecho y una obligación legal, y la educación superior, en Chile al menos, no. Pero eso es súper discutible, y en países como Argentina o Brasil, la educación superior se viene conceptualizando desde hace mucho tiempo como un derecho. En Argentina es gratuita y de acceso liberado, y tiene que ver con esa conceptualización. Entonces, en el fondo, esas asociaciones entre gobiernos y focos es un poco rara. Y hay que tomarla en cuenta porque a veces se dan fenómenos más inesperados que el que contaba Francisco respecto de Paulo Freire. Vamos ahora a una segunda parte, me parece, política que puede que, sobre la que podamos tener más influencia, que tiene que ver con nuestro campo. Entre docentes latinoamericanos y también de otros lados, pero centrémonos en Latinoamérica, es muy frecuente lo que la bibliografía llama narrativas de crisis de literacidad. Narrativas de crisis de literacidad. Y lo que la bibliografía también llama perspectivas del déficit, ¿no? Desde ese punto de vista, los estudiantes escriben pésimo y son culpables de ese déficit. Es una estigmatización, no tiene nada que ver ni con nosotros, ni con las tareas que pedimos, ni con los currículum que proponemos, ni nada de eso, sino que es un problema que tiene el estudiante, ¿sí? Es una perspectiva del déficit. Y por otro lado, una crisis de literacidad significa que es ahora cuando están escribiendo mal y no hace 30, 40, 60 o 100 años, ¿sí? Lo cual también es falso, porque cuando uno va a los documentos ve que era la misma queja respecto de la generación actual con una supuesta generación anterior que era fantástica. Ahora, estas dos perspectivas son perspectivas conservadoras y reaccionarias, es decir, son perspectivas políticas falsamente progres o falsamente apolíticas, porque lo que muestra también la bibliografía es que estas reacciones, perspectiva del déficit y narrativa de la crisis, surgen en momentos particulares. Y esos momentos particulares son cuando el sistema educativo se abren a una mayor parte de la población. Sucedió cuando se abrieron las puertas a etnias históricamente desplazadas en los 70s en Estados Unidos, sucede en Latinoamérica cuando la educación superior se masificó desde los 80s y sucedió en hechos históricos previos con el mismo patrón. Entonces nosotros tenemos que tener conciencia que cada vez que decimos estos estudiantes cada vez vienen peor, en realidad estamos diciendo ojalá la universidad fuera para unos pocos que vienen de familias ilustradas y que no necesitamos enseñar. Por otro lado, también muchas veces no nos damos cuenta y despolitizamos que las formas de escritura que nos parecen tan bonitas y que enseñamos y que vivimos y ejercitamos, son formas de escritura y formas de oralidad, escrituras asociadas a las clases pudientes, a los sistemas hegemónicos. Entonces, eso también hay que politizarlo, hay que mostrar lo político que es eso, ¿no? Y ahí nuestra postura política sería no necesariamente hacer la revolución, bueno, cada uno haga lo que quiera, pero sí señalar esa característica y mostrar que hay otras formas de comunicación oral y escrita que son distintas y que han sido históricamente estigmatizadas. Último comentario. Me preocupa un poco en nuestro campo cierta distinción entre dos grupos de investigadores y profes, ¿sí?, de escritura. Por un lado tenemos personas que están muy preocupadas en desarrollar pedagogías de la lectura y la escritura, montar programas y enseñar a escribir para que a los estudiantes les vaya bien, pero que en general no tienen demasiado interés en estos temas más políticos, en cuestiones de diversidades de registros y patrimonios culturales, en temas de derechos, en temas de voces y en temas de experiencia estudiantil. Y luego tenemos otro grupo de investigadores y profes que están súper interesados en eso, que tienen métodos que brindan datos, pero que muchas veces nos dicen, bueno, la pedagogía no es lo mío, yo de eso no sé, ya veremos, yo no enseño escritura, eso es de otras personas. Me parece que, y lo vengo escribiendo hace un tiempo, necesitamos que esos dos caminos se comuniquen más en Latinoamérica, y creo que la pedagogía de la escritura futura va a ser una pedagogía que se va a informar por esos estudios más socioculturales y politizados, ¿sí?, pero que también se va a transformar en algún tipo de pedagogía distinta de una pedagogía que simplemente transmite y expande con estas formas de escritura hegemónicas. Entonces también es un llamado a que nuestra postura política sea incorporar esas perspectivas y evidencias en una pedagogía inclusiva y crítica de la escritura futura. Gracias y perdón, Jesús.
Thank you, Federico. Well, Federico raises several points. The first one concerns the apparently strange relationships that governments from different political orientations have with writing and with education. For example, he points out that he has observed that conservative governments in Chile before paid much more attention to writing evaluation than does the current left-wing government in Chile, for example. And that the current left-wing government in Chile has been de-emphasizing writing higher education, and it has placed almost an exclusive focus on writing at the elementary level. So that's one thing. The other point concerns how certain conservative voices have been for decades pushing narratives of literacy crisis, deficit perspectives, and they are putting the blame on students, which is a way to hide their true interest in education, keeping its elite nature and keeping certain students fended off from that, from access to that right. The next point he makes concerns the way writing is political because it reflects the ways of writing, the ways of meaning of powerful hegemonic social classes, and that's something that needs to be shown, it needs to be made visible and commented in the classroom and in other fora. Finally, he expresses his concern about the distinction between two types of pedagogy or literacy pedagogy theorists. Ones who are very concerned with making it possible for students from different backgrounds to be able to access meanings or meaning making resources without much care or much concern about the political undertones that these meanings have. And on the other hand, a group of pedagogy experts who are very sensitive to political issues but who don't deal with pedagogy. I hope that was a good translation. So um, I think next is Francisco. What do you think? Oh, Christian, sorry. I'm sorry. Got my notes messed up here. Sorry.
It's all about literacy under pressure. Yes, thank you. This is great, and I agree. Let me just make a couple of points. One, I think, in general, yes, politics comes in at different points in different ways. One important consideration is, again, to return to something that came up in the first question, disciplinarity. I mean, disciplinary specialized knowledge and different disciplinary communities and the people engaged in them, transmitting and so on. And in my view, my late great friend Giovanni Parodi, who had a long-term project on this, looking at in tertiary education, showed very clearly that there is considerable variation across disciplines. And it relates to what I was beginning to talk about in response to the first question, that is disciplines. I just made a very broad distinction between disciplines that are, as it were, focused on material phenomena versus disciplines that are focused on immaterial phenomena. But I think we can introduce further distinctions. There are different frameworks for this. One that Michael Hullard and I worked with, and I'm still working with and trying to develop, is sort of material realms of phenomena, physical, then physical plus life, biological. Then you go into the immaterial, biological, but also value or role, social order, so social systems. And then finally, also within the immaterial, life as a abbreviation of the biological, and value as a abbreviation of the semiotic, plus meaning, or if you prefer in a cognitive framing plus cognition. Now, I think we can trace the development of the breakthrough in modern science in Western Eurasia on the order of 500 years ago. So, and then we can trace the development of academic speaking and academic writing, and there are very interesting accounts by various scholars, including Baserman, whose work I think has been important in Latin America. Now, what Giovanni found was that there are considerable differences in the registerial makeup, the registerial composition of what students engage with. He started with undergraduate students in two more material science disciplines and two more immaterial science disciplines. And then he continued the work also looking at PhD students and looking at more disciplines. I think that's important because the construction of knowledge, and we can refer to Bernstein, but I won't pursue that now, is different. And it relates to also what I brought up in the first round, the role of grammatical metaphor, also lexical metaphor, and for that matter, in the ideational, in abstraction, in the construction of meaning, and my concern when we move into the immaterial realms, as it were. Now, it's interesting to note that in various places that tend to be more authoritarian, I think the disciplines they're more worried about are the immaterial ones. So they need the material ones, including physics, applied physics, different branches of engineering, medicine, of course, and so on and so forth. But the immaterial ones are worrying, right? And the reason for the worry is, in some sense, the increasing political sensitivities that come with them, and also the potential they see, I think, for confrontation, for critiques of the prevalent ideologies, the prevalent discourses, and so on. So, for example, our old university, Franciscus and mine, the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, for years they were trying to establish a campus in mainland China, there in Hong Kong. Finally, it was agreed, and people were very happy because retired professors supposedly go teach there. Then we learned from the area where this project was being launched, they didn't want anything, to put it in my terms, no immaterial disciplines. They wanted the material disciplines. And that was not too hard to imagine why. I mean, they were worried about the kinds of discourses you get in the immaterial disciplines, the foregrounding of argumentation, of contestation. It's there, of course, in physics, chemistry, and so on, but in a very different way. And again, Giovanni showed this, I think, very clearly. So if you think about, you could say, for example, what would it mean to have a Marxist theory, a string theory, or to have a neoliberal string theory? Well, it wouldn't make all that much sense. But when we get into the material sciences, these are very important distinctions. And the question of point of view, right, perspective beyond that which is dictated by technology and also by our semiotic resources, like branches of mathematics, differential calculus, and so on, becomes ever more present. And again, that has to do, I think, with Giovanni's findings about the registerial makeup of the different disciplinary texts that students engage with at different stages. So when we get here into these higher ones, absolutely. And maybe we could talk about not only political, but generally ideological, right? Taking political ideology as part of it. Now, if we then take a step back and think about what's the role of education, then again, of course, that is, broadly speaking, political and ideological. And the one view was promoted by Prussia in the 19th century when they discovered that their soldiers were not trained in such a way that they would be maximally effective, say, against the French. There were setbacks. So this notion of education, and you refer to discipline, military schools and so on, this notion of education as, you could say, a knowledge industry that feeds into the society what it needs. And you refer to the elite. So this is often, if it's a very hierarchic, autocratic society in particular, but I think that's true in also so-called more liberal societies. The educational industry will produce what the society needs. So we'll cut off, it will produce people who could, now we don't need them any longer, we work at the assembly line. Robots can do this, right? So I think you see this very clearly. Contrasting with this would be a notion, a conception of education that is actually for the improvement of the human condition. Individuals in their groups, in their social groups, their meaning groups, in their societies, in their communities. Now, that's a very different view, and there are different perspectives on it. But I think, arguably, some of the challenges we've discussed and face come precisely because of the conception of education as this kind of industry that feeds into the societies in which it operates, and you get the tension. So I think part of what we want to think about is precisely a kind of repositioning of what primary, pre-primary, secondary, tertiary education, what these do, what lifelong education means, lifelong learning, the increasing need for people. You know, it used to be the case you could graduate with a undergraduate degree, possibly you top it up with a master's degree. Now we're looking at a situation because of the accelerating changes where people have to keep coming back. What does that mean? What does it mean in terms of, again, feeding the society, the demands of society they're part of? So absolutely, I think from that point of view, all academic writing, all academic speaking is politically positioned or ideologically positioned.
Thank you very much, Christian. Bueno, Christian ubica el carácter político de la escritura y de la educación en aspectos como la variación entre las disciplinas, como hay algunas disciplinas que tienen se podría decir, un carácter más autoritario, más controlador en cuanto a las voces, y disciplinas que por su naturaleza promueven el cuestionamiento, promueven la resistencia y el diálogo, y que precisamente por esa naturaleza crítica de esas disciplinas, estas son muchas veces discriminadas en el contexto universitario. Y bueno, al final también hacía o comentaba sobre cómo esta visión industrial de la educación, como la encargada de producir ciudadanos para una sociedad determinada, también es política, también legitima visiones politizadas del mundo y de la sociedad. So, well, I think on the whole, there's been a high level of agreement between our panelists, with different points being raised regarding the third question. On one hand, Francisco pointed out the how, for example, in Brazil, the rise of Bolsonaro's regime turned Paulo Freire into a public enemy and pushed for military education, and how there is a mismatch between what those who want to make a change want to achieve and what actually happens in the classroom. Federico made a number of various points which are in general agreement with Francisco's position, Francisco's stance. He also notes differences between the relationship of right-wing and left-wing governments with education and the things they want to emphasize, and how certain narratives of crisis and deficit are espoused by conservative sectors of society as a way to push back for privilege and elitism. And finally, Christian connects the debate with disciplines and how certain disciplines, because of their nature, push for more contestation and debate. Bueno, entonces podemos cerrar esta tercera y última ronda de preguntas diciendo que hay un alto grado de acuerdo entre los participantes. Ellos desde sus distintos contextos notan que según la orientación política o ideológica de los gobiernos en turno, se revela la preferencia por una u otra forma de ver la escritura, como por ejemplo la resistencia a las visiones de Paulo Freire durante el gobierno de Bolsonaro, el hecho de que en el actual gobierno de Chile, al parecer, no hay mucho interés por la evaluación de la escritura o incluso por la escritura misma en educación superior. Y también notaba Cristian esto en la forma como las distintas disciplinas funcionan. Well, we have a few minutes for interaction with the public. So Nayibe, you have raised your hand. Anyone else? Okay, so you have one question, Nayibe. You don't have one question. Yes? Yeah.
Muy poderoso, porque está pedir perdón es una forma de castigar la justicia de alguna manera, no es ir a la cárcel solamente, y también está la reparación material. Pero hay un punto donde últimamente hay una tendencia a hablar de un lenguaje restaurativo, porque ahí el lenguaje tiene una fuerza y un poder. Gracias. ¿Cómo hacemos en Colombia, a propósito de toda esta situación, para que este currículo hay una intencionalidad? Entonces, esos déficits que queremos intencionalmente repararlos, pero también acompañar esa parte de que la nación está en un proceso de, por fin, o por lo menos intentar consolidar la paz. ¿Cómo hacemos a través de ese proceso de la escritura, a través del currículo? Tenemos aquí personas, creo, o está alguien
de lo que tiene que ver con las políticas públicas de Estado. ¿Qué hacemos? ¿Cómo agenciamos o desde acá empujamos también para que esa realidad que tanto anhelamos en Colombia de tener paz, la hagamos a través de ese proceso, nosotros que somos los profesionales en este sentido? Gracias.
Gracias, Emiluz. ¿Te gustaría dirigir la pregunta a alguno de los panelistas? O...
Tal vez a nuestro invitado especial, porque conoce más el contexto latinoamericano y creo que lo vive y lo sufre y tiene experiencias en otros países donde también han estado con estos procesos de violencia.
Thank you, Emiluz. So Emiluz's question is that on the whole, because of the recent political changes, there has been increasing societal awareness of peace and peace construction as a necessary societal outcome. How do we make that broader concern for peace real in the concrete actions that we carry out in the classroom? How can we make it real? So she would like to raise the question specifically for Federico.
Qué difícil pregunta. ¿No se la querés hacer a Cristian o a Francisco? Es muy difícil la pregunta, entonces voy a compartir algunas ideas, pero no sé si tengo la respuesta, ¿sí? A la mañana en el taller conversábamos respecto de que la escritura tiene el potencial, tiene ciertas funciones potenciales muy interesantes que podemos, creo, explorar y fomentar en relación con esta temática. A través de la escritura participamos en comunidades, a partir de la escritura podemos expresar nuestra voz y nuestro punto de vista. A través de la escritura también podemos hacer críticas y podemos proponer cambios. Por otro lado, la escritura es un medio de participación ciudadana cada vez más sofisticado y en ese sentido las personas que no tienen una alfabetización avanzada, no han tenido la oportunidad, la trayectoria para tenerla, se quedan fuera de muchos procesos increíblemente complejos en términos de literacidad. Por ahí escuchaba el tema, me contaban esta semana, de lo que es en Colombia sacar una visa para Estados Unidos. Y yo conozco un poco ese proceso y es de una complejidad letrada enorme, además de económica, etcétera, de clase, de tener bienes materiales. Pero la cantidad de documentos, la cantidad de géneros que hay que ir atravesando, claramente funciona como una barrera. Está pensado como una barrera letrada. Entonces, eso lo podemos trasladar a otras cuestiones en donde participar en ese proceso requiere que los participantes tengan formas, conozcan y manejen formas letradas sofisticadas. Entonces me parece que, además de las funciones más generales que mencioné antes, expresión, crítica, hay una cuestión de participación que requiere la formación en esas formas letradas particulares. Y ahí es donde sí tenemos un rol súper importante. Y eso también, y cierro con esto, me lleva a enfatizar una cuestión que estuvimos trabajando hoy a la mañana, que es la idea de que para que, digámoslo así, una ingeniera escriba bien en ingeniería, no tiene que solo escribir textos de ingeniería. Podemos en aula trabajar otras clases de textos en donde ejercitemos ciertas competencias transferibles como la atención a la audiencia, ¿sí? La anticipación de objeciones, la estructuración, la planificación, etc. Y eso se puede hacer a partir de géneros más entretenidos, digamos, a partir de géneros vernáculos, a partir de géneros que tienen sentido para los estudiantes. También ahí tenemos que sacarnos un poco el chip de que enseñar a escribir es enseñar los géneros, la lista de 15, 20 géneros específicos clave en esa profesión. Eso está bien, hay que hacerlo, ¿sí? Pero también podemos trabajar con otros géneros inventados por nosotros, híbridos, multimodales, que también alimentan un buen desempeño en esos géneros más disciplinares. Y ahí hay una ventana de oportunidad súper interesante para vincular con problemáticas de nuestro entorno y que nos interesan y que les interesan a nuestros estudiantes, ¿sí? Y comentaba que ayer me enteré con alegría que en el programa de inglés de esta universidad, o de al menos de algunos de los departamentos, el coordinador a cargo, él mismo, lidera un trabajo de escritura de blogs vinculados con la temática medioambiental, pero bien concreta, vinculado a el tema de la persecución y asesinato de líderes comunitarios, medioambientales. Entonces, ahí, ese es un excelente ejemplo, que no tiene por qué solo pasar en inglés, puede pasar en otros ámbitos, de conectar la escritura con estas problemáticas coyunturales que nos interesan a todos.
Thank you, Federico. So regarding our participants' question, he believes that for peace construction to become materialized in the classroom, it is important to emphasize literate practices and access to literate practices as something that needs to be democratized, so that barriers for access to different rights do not continue to exist. And he points out how the use of vernacular genres can be used for purposes in connection with peace. He points out the example of a teacher in the English program who is using blocks to address the killing of environmental leaders in Colombia. So he makes the point, or he emphasizes the point, that it's not simply about teaching the genres of the discipline, but also giving a place to vernacular form of vernacular registers, which can give an opportunity for these peace construction initiatives. I think we don't have time for more questions, so I'd like to close by thanking Christian, Francisco, and Federico for joining us today. It's been a really interesting conversation. We hope to continue it in different scenarios. For the time being, thank you very much. And I think, Nayibe, you would like to also give closure to this year's official program of the Escuela Lingüística. There will be another workshop for the Writing Center in the afternoon. So this is like the last public event of the Escuela. As one of the organizers, I'd like to thank you very much for attending, for enjoying our participants, our guests' insights and teachings, and we hope to see you next year. Okay.
El agradecimiento inicia con la presencia tan enriquecedora de Federico en nuestra escuela. Realmente sus conocimientos, la pertinencia del conocimiento que tiene para nuestro contexto realmente ha sido asombroso. Haberlo leído y luego tenerlo aquí ha sido maravilloso. La experiencia que tiene, pero sobre todo esa humanidad, generosidad, el sentido del humor que creo yo que todos hemos disfrutado. Así que muchísimas gracias, Federico, y el que viene a la escuela la primera vez viene siempre. Ya ves aquí a Cristian, a Federico y a Francisco, que nos acompañaron el año pasado. Entonces siempre quedamos como comprometidos con esta tarea de ayudar a expandir el campo. Muchísimas gracias. A Cristian y a Francisco, que son fans de nuestra escuela y colaboran, y muchísimas gracias también. Y por supuesto a Jesús, que ha sido coordinador de esta escuela y de las previas, y que con su gran entusiasmo, organización, nos lleva siempre personas diferentes, perspectivas diferentes. Muchísimas gracias, Jesús. Lo admiramos muchísimo y lo amamos, así como es él. Por supuesto, un aplauso para Jesús. A nuestra decana, que permite que sigamos construyendo con el lenguaje, como dice Adri, y con el lenguaje para construir lo que queremos. Luz Karime, que ya se fue, nuestra directora del Centro de Escritura, que ha apoyado de muchas maneras este evento. A Lourdes, nuestra colega del Departamento de Lenguas Extranjeras, que es un apoyo invaluable en todo sentido para el desarrollo de la escuela. Pero por supuesto también a nuestro querido Álvaro, que ustedes lo ven por ahí, pero que es la fuerza detrás de todo esto, junto con Jenny, nuestra nueva asistente, Angie, pero también nuestra vieja que está por ahí, Rosita, que acabó de salir, pero todavía está aquí apoyándonos en este momento. Y a ustedes realmente, a los participantes de la escuela, porque lo hacemos para ustedes, porque se dan permiso para venir, para aprender, para continuar expandiendo eso que hacemos en el aula, ¿verdad? Y sobre todo porque vienen y al venir aquí creamos esta comunidad que es fuerte, que es necesaria y que poco a poco con nuestras acciones diarias construimos esa Colombia que queremos. Muchas gracias. Y bueno, damos cierre a la escuela formalmente. Gracias.
Explora más contenidos de tu interés. No olvides suscribirte a nuestro canal.